I'm using cold press watercolour paper on block. I put some washi tape around the border and I'm putting washi tape here just above halfway. And I'm sketching some trees in the distance using an HB pencil. So it's a really sort of nice, simple composition here. Just sketching the other side here on the left as well. So I'm going to paint the sky first. I'm mixing up a puddle of cerulean using my size 8 brush, adding plenty of water. If you're painting a large area, always mix up more paint than you think you need. You don't want to be doing this halfway through the wash when you're painting and find that you've run out of paint. So again, now I am mixing ultramarine with a pinch of cerulean. Again, a nice big puddle. So I've got 2 blues for the sky here with plenty of water and paint. Giving my brush a good rinse now. Mixing up some buff titanium, nice big puddle. This is for the horizon area. So plenty of water again. And I am going to wet the sky area with a large mop brush. Take your time doing this. I am working on a watercolour block, so it doesn't warp as much. But if you're using watercolour paper that's not on a block, you might want to wet the back of your paper and stick it to a non-absorbent surface and then wet your sky area, and it will give you longer to paint. And I'll put a link for a tutorial where it helps you with this process in the description below. So as you saw there, I loaded my brush and I'm painting this buff titanium in the horizon, but also in the middle of the sky there, leaving gaps for clouds and just a little bit at the top. Now, if you don't have buff titanium, you could use raw sienna, but just use that on the horizon because raw sienna can actually turn a little bit green, especially if you use cerulean blue. So I'm going to mix up some raw sienna now and plenty of water, and I'm painting this along the horizon just to warm it up slightly, and I'm tilting to allow the paint to flow, and I'm collecting the puddles at the end. So I'm loading my large mop brush with plenty of cerulean and I'm squeezing the brush hairs and allowing it to fall onto the paper, and now I'm tilting. So I'm hardly touching the paper with the brush, just teasing it there just to help it along. So just tilting. Look how beautiful that looks, how fresh and how transparent. So tilt. Allow the paint to just flow and to blend. Now loading my brush with the ultramarine, doing the same thing, squeezing those brush hairs, allowing the beautiful ultramarine to fall onto that paper and just tilt it. You just get the most amazing atmospheric skies using this sort of tilting and pouring technique. And just take your time. You know, your sky may not look like this, but just go with the flow and collect puddles at the end there with a clean, damp brush. So mixing up some more cerulean now with plenty of water. Using this large mop brush, I'm squeezing the brush hairs to allow a big puddle of cerulean to fall onto the sort of bottom of the sky area and tilting. You don't get so much green when you paint this way because you're not physically sort of stirring the paint with your brush. You're mixing on the paper and you get these beautiful effects. There's just nothing like it. This is why I love watercolour so much. Watercolour is also about patience, so spend time tilting. There's some beautiful granulation here as well. Cerulean and ultramarine granulate to create this beautiful texture. And it's very characteristic of watercolour as well. So just mopping up the little puddle on the horizon there, and again tilting. So mixing up some more cerulean and ultramarine mix, a little bit darker, a little bit stronger. Make sure you have plenty of paint so that when you squeeze the brush hairs, you'll get plenty of paint falling off the brush. If this doesn't happen, you just haven't loaded your brush enough. Just make lots of paint. This is a slightly stronger colour and I'm putting it at the top of the sky area. That's the sort of more foreground area where you want the tonal value to be stronger, and this will create depth in your painting. Lighter tonal values recede, stronger tonal values come forward, and it will create depth. I'm just spritzing now with a spritzer bottle to allow the paint to flow, to look more natural, and I am mopping up with my paper towel. So while the sky is still wet, I am using Paynes Grey and a plastic card. This Paynes Grey is straight from my watercolour pan. I'm using Daniel Smith's moist watercolour pans, but you could actually squeeze out some Paynes Grey or black paint, and I'm applying that onto the wet surface using the plastic card. I am now tilting my painting. I'm using a container there, so I've got about a 45-degree angle. This is just to stop that Paynes Grey from running up into the sky. So I'm mixing up some sap green and Paynes Grey. Any green will do. And I'm applying this mix, almost sort of damp into wet. That sky area is very wet, so it's diluting the paint again on the paper. I want some lovely special effects on the sort of top part of those trees. So I'm tilting. There's still quite a lot of water, so I just want to get rid of that excess water there. So again, patience, just get rid of the water if there's any excess water. So keep tilting just to allow that to flow off on the edge. So I'm just spritzing here the edge there just to get rid of a dark area and just mopping up any excess paint and water. So using my brush now with the Paynes Grey and sap green, so it's a very, very dark green. I'm using my size 2 brush and I'm tickling this creamy paint onto this wet surface right on top of that washi tape. So that sort of paler wash of the trees is behind, and I'm kind of putting sort of darker trees in front of that, so kind of almost layering but still on this wet or damp surface. So dipping my plastic card into the burnt sienna and ultramarine, mixing it with a plastic card, and I'm just applying this to the right hand side. I was thinking I could have some buildings here, possibly. It might still end up being trees, but I'm very open to what will happen on this damp surface. So I'm sort of sculpting these using the plastic card. I've added a little bit of Paynes Grey there as well. And just tickling the paint on, trying to create sort of more natural looking sort of marks and shapes, etc. Using my size 2 brush again, just adding a little bit more paint here. So almost creating the look of sort of the tops of trees, etc. And this is pretty much damp into damp. So the surface now is damp and not wet. And the paint is still quite thick and creamy, so it doesn't run too much. As you can see there, I have left light areas as well. I'm sort of painting darks around them. You can see the tops of the trees there look really natural because of that damp surface. So using the plastic card now, and I am going to sort of lift out sort of shapes there, almost of little buildings in between those trees there. So it's a little bit wet still. You can see it's not lifting off as well. So you may, and I may, need to wait a little bit longer to swipe. So going back into swiping again, and it's a little bit easier to remove the paint now. Try to swipe just once. Don't go back and forth because you could damage the surface of the paper. But I just want to create the look of some buildings through those trees there. So I'm just adding a little bit more dark along the horizon using the Paynes Grey. I'm removing the tape to reveal a lovely straight edge. There's a little bit of leakage there, but don't worry. We can always sort of soften and disguise that using a clean, damp brush. I'm adding a little bit more dark there to the horizon just to finesse that area there using my size 2 round brush and Paynes Grey. I'm sprinkling some salt along the horizon area, and this is to create some lovely textures for those trees, and I'll allow that to dry naturally. For step 2, I'm going to paint the sea and the foreground. Now the distance hasn't dried, so in order for the paint not to sort of run into the sea, I'm leaving a white gap, a dry white gap about 2 millimeters wide between the horizon line and the top of the sea. down to the bottom third of the painting, leaving the foreground dry. I'm mixing up cerulean and a pinch of buff titanium so it's not a bright blue. It neutralises it. You can use a pinch of yellow ochre or raw sienna. And I'm just using some cerulean on its own as well. So nice big puddles, remember. Again, I am squeezing the brush hairs to allow the paint just to flow onto the paper without too much brush work, and I'm tilting. Sort of squeezing the brush and the hairs there to the right hand side, allowing that cerulean and a pinch of buff titanium to sort of blend and mix to the left hand side there by tilting. And as you can see, the paint's not going to run onto that horizon area and the trees. Loading my brush again with plenty of cerulean, buff titanium and lots of water. Squeezing those brush hairs, allowing that paint to fall onto the paper. Just allowing it to flow. And to help it with gravity, I'm tilting to allow that paint just to run to the left-hand side there, to create natural looking atmospheric effects. Doing the same on the bottom left-hand side of the sea there, the cerulean and the buff titanium. I love that texture that's created there because the foreground is dry, so it's creating that wonderful texture. I'm just sort of tilting away here, allowing the paint to flow, and I'm spritzing to help it on its way to make it look more natural. When you're spritzing, just sort of spritz very gently, don't over spritz, a couple of little bursts here and there just to get the paint moving. So I'm mixing up some more buff titanium into the cerulean, so it's quite a grey kind of colour here, grey neutral colour. As you saw there, I squeeze the brush hairs, allowing the paint to fall onto the kind of shoreline there and allowing it to flow, and with the help of gravity tilting to get it to move to the right hand side. So I'm using my size 8 brush just to apply a little bit more there to the middle and then tilting both left and right to get that paint sort of moving and looking more natural. And I just love the way it runs into that sort of dry area there, creating lots of yummy textures. Applying some more buff titanium and cerulean and tilting there on the shoreline and just collecting the puddles at the end with a clean damp brush. I'm tilting now the edge of the shoreline with the spritzer bottle just to sort of make it look more natural. And I am now wetting the foreground with a large mop brush with plenty of clean water, keeping some of those lovely, yummy textured edges. Applying a big puddle of buff titanium in the foreground there by squeezing the brush hairs and tilting just to the left there and upwards, just getting it flowing there. Applying a little bit more buff titanium, this time a little bit creamier to make it slightly darker, and I'm tilting. Just allowing it all to flow down. I love those colour combinations. They're so sort of beautiful and serene and calm looking. So tilting literally at a 90-degree angle here just to allow everything to sort of flow and look natural. I'm mixing up Paynes grey and burnt umber about 50-50, quite dilute. And again, squeezing the brush hairs, allowing the paint to flow onto the paper naturally. Tilting both towards me, just getting everything flowing, mixing up buff titanium, burnt umber and a pinch of Paynes grey. Squeezing those brush hairs, allowing the paint to flow onto the paper, tilting to the left there, allowing the paint to move towards the left there, literally turning it upside down or sideways. I'm going to apply a little bit more of that dilute colour now, plenty of water added, squeezing it on to the surface there, to the right hand side, really right next to that shoreline as well. There's loads of paint here, and I've actually added a little bit of slightly thicker paint as well, and just tilting up and down, just waiting for those happy accidents to create some really nice natural effects. And again, just tilting and collecting the puddles at the end there. Even though I love this light texture here, it's kind of sort of getting in the way. It's kind of taking a lot of attention. So I'm spritzing it with the spritzer bottle and then just allowing the paint to flow down just to soften that area. Sometimes it's great to leave things, but I just felt that was quite distracting. And I'm adding salt now to that area, and that will absorb the paint to create light textures once dry. I'm also using a watercolour pencil, a dark brown, with sandpaper. I'm rubbing the tip of the watercolour pencil against the sandpaper and allowing the pigment to fall onto the surface, and once dry it will be set. I'm mixing up some burnt sienna with my plastic card, and I'm applying it damp into damp, sort of just below those trees, leaving a gap sort of between the horizon line there and this area. It's pretty much dry, the paper. It's still not completely dry, but this area is dry. And I'm just applying this thick, creamy paint with a pinch of Paynes grey now and burnt sienna, and gently applying it to the sort of almost dry surface. You can see there's a lot of texture there. And I'm spritzing it gently with my spritzer bottle, trying to avoid the trees. Now this is quite tricky, so if you're worried about this, you could use a clean, wet brush to do this. So I'm tilting as well to allow the paint to flow down. I love that warm sort of burnt sienna colour there. I'm just mopping up the excess paint on the edge. So I'm using a clean, damp size 6 brush and just softening some of that paint there, just to make it look more natural, so it's not sort of too thick and dark. Mixing up some Paynes grey and burnt sienna, just adding a little bit more and just softening and blending. For step 3, I'm going to paint the rocks using a plastic card to swipe, and of course a spatter to finish my painting. So starting off with burnt sienna, I'm just painting little circles, damp into damp, using my size 8 round brush. You can vary the sizes, and there's pretty much the bottom right hand corner. So I've mixed up burnt sienna and ultramarine, nice and creamy, and I'm painting it on top of the burnt sienna, but also separately as well, creating different sort of sizes there. As you can see, the paint's really sort of blending and flowing. Don't worry, just apply these sort of different sort of shades of sort of browns and blues and blue-greys here and there, varying the sizes. I am using a kebab stick. You can use a cocktail stick or a very small brush. And I'm just sort of painting little sort of rocks here, just almost the outline, using the dilute burnt sienna and ultramarine just on the almost dried surface and just along the sort of water's edge there. Just having fun with it, creating these sort of more linear marks, more outlines here and there. So I've waited a little while. There's still a sheen on the paper, but not a shine. And I'm swiping the rocks just once. And as you can see, it creates some lovely light. So the sort of darks on the right hand side and the light on the left there. And I'm sort of obviously varying the sizes because there's different sort of shapes. But it's such an effective technique, but it does take practice. So do check out the plastic card tutorial, as I have a link for it in the description below. So I've decided just to spritz a little bit here and there, just to sort of create some more abstracted areas and to loosen everything up. Now, you don't need to do this. If you're happy with what you've got, just stick with it. But I always like to kind of soften areas. So I'm just mopping up there. And then just adding a little bit more detail using the plastic card and the watery paint just here and there for some little outlines of stones there. And I'm just spattering using my size 8 brush, the ultramarine mixed with the burnt sienna, about 50-50 on the left hand side, damp into damp, to finish off my painting. So here is the finished painting. I really hope you enjoyed this semi-abstract, loose, atmospheric watercolour tutorial and that it inspires you to have a go at painting something similar to this. And if you'd like to support the content that I create here on YouTube, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? You will get access to my weekly exclusive tutorials, downloadable outline sketches, and you can cancel anytime. More details about the membership can be found in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Happy pouring and experimenting. Bye for now.